Okay. Oh, where did I go? Ah, there I am. All right, let's let people in. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me all right.
Yes, no problem.
Awesome. Excellent. Okay, so let's see, we're about 10 people. Maybe we'll just wait another moment for more people to arrive before we get started. I think we left off around slide number 10. So yes, because we were talking about William James and his abdication of the causal theory on ethical grounds. That's right. All right. So let's do first, let's let these folks in. And then let's do our screen share. Okay.
And just to clarify, this is in Theater of the Mind, Part 1?
This is Theater of the Mind, Part 2, if I'm not mistaken. This is attention and timing.
Okay, sure thing. Yes, yeah, I remember attention. Okay, thank you very much.
No problem. What was I? There we go. Slow computer. Computer's slow in the morning, like me. Although I guess it's barely morning now. I don't know. I don't have an excuse. Okay, from my current slide. Oh. Well, all right. So the plan for today is to finish, if we can, to finish off this set of slides, and then we can go on with the next chapter for next week. I believe the next chapter is the Grand Illusion, and that's a fun one, you know, because we're talking about the self. So that's fun. All right. So remember last time we were talking about causal theories and effects theories with respect to attention. So this was the example I think we left off on this slide. There's an opportunity. Somebody in the chat here. Yeah, that's funny. I feel like that during, well, everything going on. It never feels like I'm accomplishing anything. So we have causal theories and effect theories. So is consciousness an effect of attention, or does consciousness play some role in directing attention, right? These are the two theories that we're kind of considering, or groups of theories rather. And these have implication for, you know, all kinds of things. Most notably, I think, freedom of the will, right? There's a debate, a perennial debate, really, probably one of the oldest ones in philosophy, about whether human beings have freedom of the will, whether we are the authors of our own actions, right? Attention, these two theories of attention kind of bear on that debate, because one possibility is, of course, that my consciousness is directed by my attention. And my attention may not be directed by me. It could be automatic. Or maybe my consciousness can direct my attention, which would kind of fall more on the free will side of things, as opposed to the determinism side of things. So let's imagine during a lecture, and I know it's been a while, the door is opened and somebody comes into the room, so you're distracted, and maybe you turn and look and see who it was, right? Or I might do the same thing here. If my dog comes into the room, I might get distracted and see what's happening, right? And then someone asks you, hey, explain what happened, right? You might say that you noticed the door open. Like, well, I just noticed it open. So I just turned and looked and I wanted to see who it was. So it seems like what's happening, if that's the answer that you gave, that you consciously heard the sound and then you consciously turned your head to see who it was. But, of course, it may only just seem to work this way. It might not actually work this way. This could be one of those pesky illusions, right? So attention, we know, can certainly be involuntarily grabbed, right? I mean, think of when, a loud noise happens or when you're startled. You kind of reflexively orient yourself to the startling stimulus. But you can also intentionally direct your attention, of course. Like I can look around my room right now. I can look out there, outside. I could pay attention to my coffee cup. Or I could check my phone. Nothing new there. Okay, so, I can do both. And each sort of use of attention or each deployment of attention seems to depend on different kinds of processes in the brain, different processes running on different systems. See, it just happened now. I heard my dog bark and I turned my head automatically. I didn't even think to ignore my dog barking, right? So there's a good example. So when we react quickly, like when you're startled or when your dog barks, or if someone calls out your name, attention tends to be involuntary, right? And there's actually, a ventral and dorsal system when it comes to attention too, like with vision. So involuntary control of attention actually depends on the ventral attention system. So these are areas that are dedicated to, staying vigilant, alerting, if we're alerted to something, this is where our attention direction mechanisms are located. So they're in the ventral system, and the ventral system is found in the right hemisphere in the frontal, parietal, and temporal areas. So if you imagine, come here, Toots, come here, come on, come lie down. You're distracting me. See there, I consciously directed my attention. Come on, lie down. So if I'm automatic attention, those bits are located the frontal, and we have parietal and temporal here. That's where those systems are located. But when we consciously attend to something, we're using the dorsal attention system. And that's mostly located in frontal and parietal areas. So the frontal area of the brain is, of course, in the front, and the parietal area is kind of like around here, right? So we've got mechanisms for conscious direction of attention in the prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate gyrus, the intraparietal sulcus, and frontal eye fields. And by the way, I mean, don't feel like you have to memorize any of this neuroscience stuff. This is a philosophy class. If you write a paper that deals with some neuroscience or a reading response, you need to make sure you get your terms right, but you can always double check the textbook, right? Don't feel like you need to memorize all this by rote. So just in case you were worried about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was hoping to say, like, if I wanted to reference a part of the brain, like I know that emotional processing happens in the front of the brain, I can just abstract and say, like, I know where it comes from, but that's not important.
No, I would make a mention of the brain areas where it's implemented or where something is realized, because one of the themes in the class is the neural correlates of consciousness, right? What physical events in the brain correlate to conscious mental events, right? So I would make a mention if you're going to talk about, say, emotions, or emotions are actually kind of distributed throughout the brain. But let's say that you wanted to talk about something like executive control, then you would want to talk about the prefrontal cortex specifically.
Okay, and you mentioned some other things before, which were like C strains or C cells or something like that.
C fibers.
Yeah, and so like I might mention the prefrontal cortex, but I wouldn't go into detail how C fibers facilitate
Yeah,
that.
not unless your discussion requires it, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Ben, you had your hand up too.
Oh, actually, Zoe answered my question, sir. Thank you.
Oh, okay, perfect. All right, so then we'll continue then. So yeah, don't worry too much about this unless your discussion calls for it, but just know that we have a ventral attention system and a dorsal attention system. Dorsal, because, dorsal is just Latin for top. So that's why, prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate gyrus, all that squishy stuff is kind of in the front and the top, and the ventral stuff is a little bit here, but also kind of, here, because you got your parietal lobes and the temporal lobes. And those are in there. Occipital lobes are at the back, kind of like where my ponytail would be there. Now, certain kind of eye movements for keeping track of things, i.e. paying attention, is involuntary. So think about this, for example. The central fovea in our eyes has a much higher acuity than the rest of the retina. So you've got your retina, right, on the back of the eye, and there's a central area of that has higher visual acuity, right? So when we see something in our peripheral vision, it's not very clear. What we see is not very accurate, and the eyes have to sort of involuntarily orient themselves to bring the object into the foveal view, right? So if, for example, a bird flies by my window, if I see it in the periphery of my vision, it's just going to seem like a blur. But if I catch that blur in time, my eyes might automatically look, and then I'll see the bird in more detail. Because my eyes have kind of turned such that the bird is crossing my fovea, or crossing the area where the light's going to hit my fovea, which has higher visual acuity. So this is involuntary control. Is that a mistake? Well, that might be a mistake. It's involuntary control. And these are called saccades, right? Eye saccades. They can be voluntary. I'm doing it right now. Quick movements, right? But in the cases like I just described, say a bird flies by the window, or maybe somebody throws, I don't know, maybe you're having a snowball fight, and you see something coming, and you turn just in time to see the snowball that spells your doom, and you get hit with the snowball, but you see it in clear detail because you've turned your head toward the snowball, right? So saccades are quick kind of back and forth, like looking around motions, like you can see me doing here. That's saccades. Saccades can be voluntary, but in the case of what I've been describing, they are involuntary. There are also smooth pursuit cases or tracking cases. We cannot do this voluntarily. It might surprise you to know. You actually need a moving target to smoothly track. Let's take this pen, for example. I'm not sure. I'll go close to the camera so you can see, but there's a science demonstration right here. Okay, so I'm going to look at the pen, and in order for my eyes to smoothly track the pen, they actually need a moving target. See that? You can try this yourself. Now I take the pen away, and I try to do smooth pursuit. Watch what happens. And again with the pen. Now, I don't know if you're able to see, but what's actually happening there is that when I don't have the pen and I try to do smooth pursuit, I'm actually just making a bunch of saccades. I can't do smooth pursuit or tracking without a moving target. Here's a question in the chat. Yes, it's like they stutter. It's almost like it's not smooth. It's like bup, 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 bup. That's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah. And we've actually demonstrated this with, say, for example, cortically blind patients. So these are patients whose visual cortex in the occipital lobe is damaged. So information is actually still flowing through the eye, into the eye, through the optic nerves. That still works. Those mechanisms still work. And the really interesting thing is that cortically blind patients, it's because of the damage to the visual cortex, not any damage to the eye or the optic nerves, that they are blind. So even though they can't see anything, the involuntary tracking systems still work, right? Wow, that's pretty cool. Also, the movie Space Jam, not Space Jam 2. I haven't seen it. I don't think I should. I don't know. Let's not Space Jam 2, but original Space Jam. Yeah, it's bad. That's all I've heard. I've heard exactly one person who enjoyed Space Jam 2. I know one person. But we're not here to critique Space Jam. In the original Space Jam, Michael Jordan's there, and he's filming in live action, right? And then later they add the animated characters. So if you're going to interact with an animated character, you want it to seem realistic. Even, it's not there. Like Michael Jordan's not looking at Bugs Bunny. He's looking at, a stick with a tennis ball on the end of it, right? And just pretending that that's Bugs Bunny, and then they're going to stick Bugs Bunny in there later. They had to do that because if they didn't, it would look like once everything had been animated, all the human characters' eye movements wouldn't be right? It would almost be like a kind of an uncanny valley sort of thing where, Bugs Bunny's walking around the room, say, and Michael Jordan's looking at him, but his eyes are going boop, 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 instead of smooth pursuit. So they got to get Michael Jordan to look at the stick with the tennis ball on the end of it. So yeah, Space Jam, when they were filming, that was a bit of advice that one of their psychologist consultants had given. If you want to make it look more realistic, you have to make sure people's eyes are actually following the animated characters the correct way. Otherwise, it's going to look weird. All right. Oh, pop out. Perceptual pop out is another interesting one. I don't have this reproduced on the slides, but you know how there are some cases where certain things, I could show you something, and certain figures are going to pop out more than other figures. I forget which page this is on in the book, but imagine if you had a sheet of paper that had lots of regular capital L's and a couple upside down letter L's. Here, the two L's are facing the same way, right? So you have like an L, you have L's going like this, right? Most of the L's are the right way, I guess, like this, or I don't know if my screen's backwards or not right now, but anyway, the L's lengthwise are kind of the same way. So if you have a lot of proper L's and then you have an upside down one, it's going to be a little more difficult to pick out. But if you have a lot of vertical L's, you have a lot of you have a lot of vertical L's with horizontal L's. Like if most of your L's are like this, and then you have one or two that are like this or like this, it pops out, right? You just see it, right? It's almost as if it's grabbing our attention. Zoe has a question here. Pop out like T-Rex vision. I do a lot of archery, and I noticed that I can see moving targets easier than static targets. Well, I'm not sure. See, I have no experience with archery myself, so I don't know. I guess when you have a moving target, your eyes are kind of doing more of the work for you because, like, again, tracking a moving target, you have to consciously decide to do it. But right, once you're doing it, your eyes are kind of doing the work for you. T-Rex vision, is that like from Jurassic Park? Like their vision's based on movement kind of thing? Yeah, easier to judge. Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, I would say brains have brains can do some trigonometry when things are moving, right? And that might be why. Yeah, I'm not sure if I've always wondered, you know, I should ask, I have a paleontologist friend. I could ask him. But I've always wondered if that was just some stuff they made up for the movie. Like it's vision's based on movement. What does that mean? I mean, isn't all vision supposed to pick out movement? Because the environment is dynamic, right? So I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. So I have to ask my paleontologist friend. Iman says, as humans, we naturally give our attention to moving objects. I mean, yeah, this is kind of what Blackmore is saying here, that the grabbing of our attention is easily done, and it's done automatically, right? And there are good reasons why. There are good reasons why you'd want a brain and a vision system that would kind of automatically orient itself to whatever's changing in the environment, right? The good evolutionary reasons for that. T-Rex brain study, yeah, maybe. Well, see, because you know, if we could just actually do Jurassic Park and clone some dinosaurs or something, you know, then we wouldn't know, right? But we don't know because we just have fossils. And I guess birds, we can look at birds, but you know, 65 million years is a long time. You know, birds have changed. Bird vision is really cool, though. I got to tell you that bird vision is pretty neat. Yeah. No worries, Andrew. No worries. Yeah. Yeah, like if you're trying not to look, but you're like, hey, what, ah, can't unsee that. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe you don't mind. I don't know. My neighbors, I don't want to see my neighbors. No. Luckily, I don't have any windows pointed at my neighbors' places. But yeah, bird vision, just real quick. I had a colleague in grad school who did some bird vision stuff for their MRP. They did a major research project instead of a thesis, but yeah, she did some bird vision stuff. She was telling me about it. And one of the cool things that I remember that I learned from my colleague was that birds have like a different kind of frame rate than humans, if that makes sense. You know, if you show a human a series of pictures going at 26 or 27 frames per second, it's animated, right? It's smooth motion, and we see motion. And that's how animation works. And we can do higher frame rates. You know, we have higher frame rates. We have like 60 frames per second now, I think is decent. There's higher ones than that, right? But birds, if you showed them 26 frames per second animation, they would just see a series of images. They need a higher frame rate to see motion. And that's probably because they have to fly in between stuff, you know, like go watch a bird. The next time you see a bird, watch it land in a tree. It's got to navigate in between all those branches. So it needs a better frame rate, I guess. Frame rate in air quotes. Zoe says, overall, animal vision in distinction to human attention and consciousness is interesting. Like, could we measure yeah. Oh, well, could we measure animal intelligence off of visual attention? Actually, in a way, yes. I can think of one way, and that is the mirror test, right? If you show certain animals their reflection in the mirror, and maybe you put something like, put a little piece of paper here, right? You stick a piece of paper on, say it's a chimpanzee, put a piece of paper here. And the chimpanzee is going to look in the mirror and it's going to recognize, oh, that's my reflection. And he'll remove the piece of paper, right? Dolphins can do the same thing. They can recognize themselves in the mirror. And this has something to do with attention, at least. Also, yeah, collaborative problem solving. That's funny. My cats don't care about their reflections. It's weird. Same with the dog. They just don't seem to. They're like, whatever. They're not weird about it. But of course, yeah, like you say, sometimes your cat or your dog will attack. Like your cat might attack its reflection. I see videos on the internet of puppies barking at their reflection, right? So, Donovan, go ahead.
Well, yeah, because if I understand this correctly, there are relatively few animals that like actually can recognize like their own reflection as being like themselves. Like that's one of the big tests of like animal intelligence.
Yeah, exactly. That's because yeah, like it's kind of like self-awareness, testing for a sort of self-awareness, right? And you're right that very few animals can do it. I think it's mostly just the really intelligent ones. Other than humans, the great apes can do it. So gorillas, common chimps, bonobo chimps, and orangutans.
I think a handful of corvids as well.
Yeah, some corvids. So we're talking crows and ravens and birds like that. Not all of them. I don't think blue jays, for example. Blue jays are corvids, surprisingly. I don't think that blue jays can do it.
Blue jays probably have too much wrath to be able to see their reflections.
Probably. So, and what else? Yeah, other birds too. I would suspect some parrots and cockatoos. What else? What have I forgotten? Elephants.
There's a few in the chat.
Yeah, a few in the chat. Oh yeah, everyone's saying cephalopods, right? We can't forget about those. Yeah, Zoe says octopi and cuttlefish. Drew, what about cephalopods? Budgies type of bird. Yeah, they're pretty smart. But cephalopods are really cool because cephalopods are a type of mollusk. We're talking cuttlefish. We're talking squid. Maybe not squid. I mean, they're cephalopods, but squid are kind of dumb. You know, they're not super smart. Not like an octopus. Octopus, by the way, they're like the smartest invertebrate. It's crazy. They can recognize themselves. They can use tools. They can open jars. And the octopus's brain is actually distributed throughout its entire body. Amazing. Forget about what it's like to be a bat. I want to know what it's like to be an octopus. You know, that would be something. So I guess in a sense, this is all to do with attention and directing attention. And I would say that more intelligent animals, humans or non-human animals, have more sort of conscious control. It's not that we're always in control. We shouldn't make that mistake in thinking that we're always in control. But really intelligent animals can, you know, like consciously take over some of these automatic systems sometimes. But we also have to remember that looking at something and paying attention to it aren't the same thing, right? That's an important distinction to keep in mind. The superior colliculus, more brain parts, and the frontal eye fields are thought to control changes in what we look at, changes in gaze direction. Whereas the posterior parietal lobe is thought to control shifts of attention that can occur independently of the gaze. So looking at something and attending to it are actually not the same. You can have one without the other. I can pay attention right now. I mean, I'm looking at my computer screen, but I'm actually attending to the coffee cup that's in my peripheral vision, and I can reach out and grab it, no problem. So where my eyes are looking is controlled by my superior colliculus, but my posterior parietal lobes are controlling what I'm actually paying attention to. And we can also, you know, we can attend to things outside of our field of view if I wanted to. I mean, I can attend to sound. You know, maybe there's music playing in the other room. I can listen to it. I can attend to it. So, the half-second delay. This is fun stuff. This is some neuroscience, more neuroscience. Benjamin Liebe. We finally get to Benjamin Liebe, who was an American neuroscientist that did a whole lot of experiments on conscious control of action. And he found, after doing a lot of these experiments, that there seems to be evidence for about a half second, that you need a half second of continuous neuronal activity for something to become conscious. Nowadays, we call this Liebe's half-second delay. So sometimes this is called the neuronal adequacy theory of consciousness. Things will become conscious if the relevant neurons are firing for the requisite amount of time, which is about half a second or 500 milliseconds. So let's take a closer look. If I can change my slides. So Liebe did some interesting experiments with patients who already had to go into the hospital to have brain surgery, right? Because this involved stimulating subjects' brains with electrodes. Obviously, you can't do this kind of experiment. I mean, if this is an interesting tangent on, ethics and research, right? But if I want to do an experiment, say with somebody's brain, I can't just have them come on down to the lab, we'll do brain surgery, right? I can't do that because surgery is dangerous, right? Even if the person consents, right? Even if somebody says, yeah, come on, open it up, get some electrodes in there, I can't do that. It would be unethical. So, but there are people that have to go in for brain surgery anyway, right? Maybe they've got some kind of operation that needs to happen for other reasons, medical reasons. So they go in, and the neuroscientists, who maybe is researching at the hospital, like Liebe, he'll get the consent from the patient, hey, you're going for brain surgery anyway, so do you want to be a participant? And that's okay. So that's what Liebe did. All of these people were already undergoing invasive procedures. It's not like Liebe was opening heads up just willy-nilly. So the somatosensory cortex, which is an area of the brain that kind of, I guess, goes like this, kind of like down around here. It's exposed, and Liebe would apply electrodes, and the electrodes would pulse. And he could vary the frequency, duration, and intensity of the pulses. And under certain conditions, patients reported conscious sensations. And if he stimulated the right part of the cortex, he could induce in the patient a sensation of being, say, touched on the arm, even though there's no touch. Drew, go ahead.
Is this not just proof that we are material? Like the consciousness is material?
I mean, it's pretty compelling. It's pretty compelling evidence for that, right? Even though Liebe himself did not believe that, Liebe believed there was a conscious mental field,
right?
And if he tried to make it as scientifically plausible as he could, I suppose, but he's thinking of this conscious mental field as something like, think about like a magnetic field, right? All fields, or an electric field, they're all types of what physicists call force fields. They're areas in which, the forces in question influence objects that travel through them, right?
So is he basically just shorting the conscious mental field that he proposed? He's just shorting it,
maybe if there is such a field,
right?
You
didn't see my finger quotes. I had finger quotes going.
Right, yeah. I imagine that if there were such a field, or such a, if that's how consciousness works, then yeah, you could still mess with it physically, right? I would think. If say property dualism is right, and there's everything in the universe has a little bit of matter and a little bit of mental properties too, then it would seem that it's got to go both ways, right? That the physical physical properties could affect mental properties, but mental properties could affect physical ones too. That's what I would think if dualism were true. And Liebei's kind of a property dualist. So
What would be an example of mental affecting physical?
Well,
like, would that just be action? Would that
yeah.
just be like, okay,
exactly, action. Like
in theory, yeah.
in theory, because that's what we're asking right now. Like I like here, like if it seems to me that if I desire a drink of coffee, I'm the one moving my arm to pick it up, and
Right.
But that just could be an illusion, right?
Right.
And that's what the next chapter is about, whether free will is an illusion. So that'll be
Ooh,
fun.
I'm rewatching The Matrix right now because I want to see the new one. So
Oh, nice.
be good fate, free will.
Yeah, man, The Matrix. My girlfriend and I rewatched the trilogy before we went and saw the new one. No spoilers, but there are definitely each movie has a theme.
Yeah.
Free will is the big theme in the first movie. Determinism is the big
Second.
theme in the sequel.
Yeah.
And the Wachowskis, man, good movie. A good movie.
Yeah.
I love The Matrix. One of my favorite movies.
Wachowski's
Would you-
rap.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, they're awesome.
Would you think that they like continue to add like new philosophical / like psychological like research into their movies as they like went forward? Like I don't think I'm well versed enough in this field to like notice or pick out something like this, but like you're in this kind of thing. And so like would you say that like as like from 99 to 2021, like do you think that the research is kept up with the movies?
Maybe
or theories
not.
Or whatever?
Maybe not strictly speaking science, but the philosophy has kind of always been there, right?
Right.
Like the idea of the Matrix is, I don't know how plausible that is scientifically, right? And also, like, you know, the whole thing about using it's all allegory and metaphor. I mean, why would robots use humans as batteries? They would just clear the sky and have solar power, or put solar panels in space or something, right? Like they'd do something like that, right? It's allegorical, it's metaphorical, right? So that's what I think. But the philosophy, it's always been really cool philosophy wise, I think. So yeah. Donovan, go ahead.
The reason why the robots use humans as batteries when there are much more efficient and effective options available is they saw too many movies about humanity fighting off like evil empires and didn't understand the aesthetic context. So they just thought, well, if we're opposing humanity, this is just how we have to look.
Oh, that's interesting. That could be it. Maybe. Is that headcanon, or is that like?
Yeah, that is 100% my interpretation.
Okay, fair enough.
But I will be treating it as fact going forward.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's plausible. And I don't want to give away any spoilers for the new movies. The new movies is really meta. The new movie is super meta. And it was only Lana Wachowski who was involved. I think Lily's a painter now. But anyway, I still liked it. And there are different themes there. Different themes. It's got its own themes, you know, just like all the other one had, you know, free will, determinism, I guess free will again. And then, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, what time is it? Talking about the Matrix. 12:15. Okay. So Liebe is stimulating brains. I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, does anybody remember those Heritage Minutes?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Like
there's
yeah.
There's one about Dr. Wilder Penfield, who was a neurosurgeon who worked in Montreal. And he cures, there's that woman who's having seizures, right? And every time she's about to have a seizure, she smells burnt toast. Liebe is doing something a lot like that here, right? He's stimulating areas of the cortex. And what's happening? Are you seeing lights? Are you feeling a sensation on your hand? Are you smelling burnt toast, right? So yeah, that's what Liebe is doing. Something very similar, but experimental. It's experimentally, not a medical procedure. So Liebe is stimulating brains, and he observes that there's this minimum intensity below which we don't get any conscious sensation, no matter how long the stimulation continues. So if I hold my electrode onto your brain and I'm stimulating it, I could go longer than a half a second, but if the intensity is too low, no conscious sensation will be elicited. Conversely, if I have a stimulus at a liminal intensity, an intensity that's just high enough, it will still not cause any sensation unless it's continued for half a second, right? So obviously in our day-to-day lives, there's no direct stimulation of the cortex in this way, right? We're not poking our brains with electrodes, but Lebes's results do suggest that some stimulus, it could be like a touch on your arm or a light shining in your eye, needs to elicit continuing activity in the somatosensory cortex to become conscious. All right, Zoe, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask, there obviously is a distinction between like what takes half a second, what doesn't. Is pain one of those sensations that takes half a second? Because I feel like pain would almost be instantaneous in some circumstances. Like getting struck by lightning, you feel pain, but the entire discharge happens in less than a tenth of that time. So
yeah, I don't know. I wonder about that. I mean, if I imagine getting struck by lightning, I would think that in the moment I would actually have no idea what's going on, and it would be immediately after that I would feel pain. But then again, some people get electrocuted.
Yeah,
with their home electronics, right? And yeah, I'm really not sure.
I was gonna say, like, some people, when they get shot, they only notice that they've been shot afterwards. Meanwhile, with electrocution, I think it might be because like the electricity itself is affecting the nerve endings, which use electricity to transmit pain.
I think you could be right about that.
I've heard that like electrocution and electricity and shocks and stuff like that are a different kind of pain, because and like often how like when you have a numb leg, you can almost feel a little bit like electricity. Because it's like the sensations are caused by basically just like messed up wiring. Anyways, yeah, I was just curious about that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. I would there's an educational YouTube video that if people are curious about electricity, I've been watching it a lot lately. But it's an electrical engineer. His channel's called Electro Boom, and it's very educational, but it's also quite funny because the guy is always electrocuting himself. I mean, he's being silly. He's not doing anything super dangerous, I think, but he has a few videos where he kind of investigates subjective pain perception with alternating current, direct current. So anyone wants to check that out, that's pretty fun. Okay, so then let's go with Donovan and then Drew.
So this is kind of building off of something that a few things that Zoe mentioned. But it was like kind of the idea of injury is like, is it and again, I'm asking this question having like basically zero like sort of scientific knowledge on this subject, but does the idea of like, you know, being in a and feeling a sensation of pain that's like so intense your brain stops registering it, or like, I guess, you know, going into the poorly worded shock, is that like would that be like the sort of neurons like being like overwhelmed by a transmission? Like is there a point where the transmission is too strong for them to like interpret it?
I'm not sure, but
like intuitively, that's just kind of like what I thought about. Again,
yeah,
having no knowledge on the subject matter.
I have to say, like, I don't really have a whole lot of knowledge on this. So sorry.
And it might tie into the what was mentioned about how, like, you know, things like getting electrocuted is like apparently like the sort of pain, quote unquote, you feel is very different from like a regular bodily injury.
Yeah. It could be, but going back to the previous point, if what was I going to say? or I had something. Defense mechanisms for pain. I mean, yeah, some people can pass out from too much pain, right? And that's a kind of defense mechanism. I guess to save you from being conscious while you're in pain, right? And of course, this is why we anesthetize people when they undergo surgery too, right? Also, what was the other point? Also, when we are in pain, and I think this is more like injury pain, but when we're in pain, say I break my arm, my brain releases endorphins, which are actually an endogenous opioid, right? It's nature's opium. So those are hormones that work to inhibit pain. And because we have receptor sites for these endorphins, this is why opioid drugs work the way they do on people, i.e. reducing pain and making you sleepy. So those are two mechanisms that the body has: passing out and the production of opiates, endogenous opioids, like adrenaline, or not adrenaline, like endorphins. Drew, and then Zoe.
I don't know if this has been touched on or like semi-touched on, but I was wondering like what a higher intensity of shock would do. Would that delay reaction? Because I think like Zoe was talking about how like pain is like felt quicker through electricity, but like is reaction, like in this scenario with Libe, would reaction time be decreased when intensity of shock was increased?
I'm not sure. From what I know, the thing about like being, say, like people being hit by a taser, often in movies, you see them convulsing, like, but that's not really how it works. What a taser does is actually just cause your whole body to feel pain, and that's why you don't move. But there are some people who can get accustomed to that, like police officers who train other officers how to use tasers can, like, hit themselves on the arm with a taser and they're fine. So I don't know, again, I'm not really the best person to answer that question, but I will find some resources that will help answer these questions. Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And then Zoe, and then we'll get back to the slides.
I was gonna say, it was mentioned before, how sometimes your body has like defense mechanisms to pain, how you can like have a painful situation, but then your body releases endorphins and shuts off the pain. And from what I remember just doing reading, it's a localized thing. And so it's something that like, which also kind of supports the theory of like the brain being decentralized. And everything is that independently, the part of the brain that it recognized pain and then stops it from reaching the part of the brain where you feel pain, and those two parts are like different, because recognizing pain happens from individual limbs and like individual spots on the body, while feeling pain happens just in one spot in the brain.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was just an interesting addition from like stuff I know personally from what I've read.
Yeah, and that's I mean, that's really interesting because there are some things that there are some sort of mental functions, for lack of a better term, that are distributed throughout the body, right? Like reflexes, similar to what you were talking about pain. Reflexes are all the stuff that underwrites reflexive stuff, like if I tap my knee with a hammer and my leg moves, that's all happening in my leg, right? Nothing's going to the brain, or at least not before my leg moves. So yeah, really speaks to the whole idea of embodied cognition, the idea that thinking and perceiving You know, it's not something that happens just with the brain and the sense organs, but with the whole body in an environment. Hello, sir. There's a cat here. Hi. What do you want? Come here, bud. Come on. We'll see if he joins us. I don't know. Come on, buddy. Right. Where are we going now? Okay. Oh, hi. There he goes. All right. So does consciousness take time to build up? Yeah. He just wanted food. He didn't want to see me. Just food. He's eating right now. So does conscious experience take time to build up? Right? If it takes a half a second of the right level of activity for something to become conscious, then does it take time for consciousness to build? Another way you can think of it is our conscious experience lagging, right? Is our experience lagging behind what's going on in the world? I mean, consider this. Nerve signals are fast. They travel along neurons at, you know, maybe 100 meters a second. That's crazy fast. And it takes less than 1 millisecond for a signal to cross a synapse. Remember, a synapse is, you know, where an axon and a dendrite are almost but not quite touching. Auditory stimuli can take 8 to 10 milliseconds to reach the brain from the ears. Visual stimuli can take 20 to 40 milliseconds to travel from the eyes to the brain. And behavioral reaction times can be as little as 200 milliseconds. Recognizing a stimulus often takes less than half a second. And you know, we've even got reflexive stuff going on that's not even under the control of anything in the brain. Like if I accidentally touch a burning hot stove, I withdraw my hand reflexively before I experience the pain, right? So in neurological terms, a half a second is actually a long time. Are we really like that? Like that would be significant in neurological relative to the speed that things happen in the nervous system. A half a second delay between your conscious experience and the world would be a crazy long time, right? So does consciousness really do that? Does consciousness really lag in this way? Liebe has a really interesting kind of way that he deals with this. I'll tell you about it once I get to the next slide. Here we go. So Liebe's got to come up with a way to deal with this. He's got to do some more experiments. So that's what he does. He continues his experimentation, and you know, he already knew, neuroscientists like Liebe already knew that strong electrical stimulation of the somatosensory cortex would interfere with sensations coming from other places like the skin. So if consciousness really takes half a second to build up, then what we should be able to do is say, touch somebody on the arm and then block that sensation by stimulating the right area of the cortex up to about a half a second later. And that's what Liebe did. So he stimulated the skin and then the cortex. So, you know, he's got somebody on the operating table. Maybe the skin stimulus is just, you know, could be something as simple as this. And then 200 to 500 milliseconds after that, he stimulates the somatosensory cortex. And what happens is that if he this signal had enough time to become conscious, the stimulating signal would interfere with the skin stimulus signal, and they wouldn't experience this. Crazy, right?
This
Drew,
could
go
be
ahead.
completely way far off, but there's a movie with Will Smith called Focus where he's a con man, and there's a scene where he's essentially like telling Margot Robbie's the other actress, but like the scene is, if I touch you here, I take from here, and it's kind of like distracting attention.
Yes.
So like if I direct your attention over here, I can take from here because you're not looking over here. So that kind of like what this is like a distraction so that you can't feel something.
It's not quite a distraction, it's an interference.
Right.
So I would say this is a neural interference. But what you're talking about is actually something that we call misdirection.
Right. Okay.
And misdirection is something that, well, con artists, pickpockets, but magicians, right?
Mm.
This is how magicians do it. You know, do I want to do a magic trick? I don't know, probably not.
Yes, you do.
This is too
Yes,
big.
you want to do a magic trick, Josh.
Let's try. Let's see. I mean, I'm not really going to do a magic trick,
Oh,
but the basic idea, if I can get a coin out of my BB-8 here. So, you know, when a magician makes a coin, like think about Down's palm, right? This is called Down's palm. Oh my God, I'm such a nerd. So Down's palm is when you have a coin hidden like this, right? It's just here, right? So I don't want you to look there. Like if I'm holding my hand like this, like I can kind of move my hand, but if I move it too much, the coin's just going to fall out. So I need to misdirect you. So and you'll notice magicians doing this. They'll be like, look at my hand. Whoa, there's nothing in my hand. And their other hand is moving around like crazy, misdirecting people, right? I'll find some examples of, actually Penn and Teller have a really good cup and ball routine where they actually show you how they do it with transparent cups after they do the original effect. And you can see the misdirection in action. So, yeah. Who is next? Is it Zoe?
Yeah. It's oh, there was oh yes, the misdirection. I was thinking more like the experiment with blocking pain before it gets there is more like noise canceling headphones, where like they play the reverse tone of what's going on, and so like misdirection is distracting from the pain, but it sounds like they're putting the electrodes on the same spot of the brain that'd be feeling it.
Yes.
And so like I know noise canceling headphones, what they do is they take like a droning tone like from an air conditioner that has a constant tone outside, and they are able to play a reverse tone on a scale that like effectively oh, sorry, my headphones disconnected, but I'm wondering if like that's how the pain experiment worked.
I would say that I mean, it doesn't exactly work that way, but that's actually a pretty good analogy, right? Like if I have like you're basically right, noise canceling headphones will feature another tone that is out of phase with what's being played here, right? Or the phase that's rather like if there's noise in the environment, they'll play the same tone but out of phase, and those sine waves cancel each other out, like you say. This kind of like, it's not exactly what's going on here, but it's analogous to noise canceling headphones. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's cool. Thanks for that. So Libe is able to mess with people's minds, quite literally. And make people not be conscious of stimuli that they would normally be conscious of by stimulating the brain at the right intensity, at the right time, for the right amount of time. So it seems like there's this half-second delay, right? But we don't experience the world lagging behind. A half a second is a long time. In neurological terms, it's a very long time, but even in day-to-day life, I mean, 1/1000, half of that time where I said 1/1000, so 1/1, I guess, that's a long time. That's half a second. So we would notice if the world were lagging, or if our experience were lagging behind the world. How on earth would we be able to walk around, drive cars, or do anything that we need to do? It would be crazy. Drew, go ahead.
How would the disconnect work between moving your hand and perceiving your hand in that case?
Well, right,
if there's a half-second delay between you moving your hand, so there's a half-second delay that it takes for you to move your hand, and then there's another half-second delay to be a full second delay by the time that you see your hand, because it's your visual picking up your hand, but it's also your physical moving your hand.
Yeah, like
your muscular movement moving your hand.
But that's what I mean, right? Like you don't experience that, right?
Right.
So what's going on? Like if Libe is right, there should be all this lagging like you described, but there isn't. So what the heck is happening? that's what Liebe tries to explain next. So what he does is he investigates this question by asking participants to report the subjective timing of two sensations. So the stimulus to the skin and the cortically induced sensation. And they're reporting the timing. This is important to, oh my goodness, excuse me. An important thing to keep in mind is that these are subjective timing. Participants are watching some kind of clock. Usually it's an oscilloscope. They used to have these old cathode ray oscilloscopes. You've probably seen them in movies and TV shows where, you know, there's a circular screen and there's a dot that goes around. You know, you can display like a sine wave in the view screen, but you can also just have a dot just going around, and that's what people would be monitoring to sort of time things, right? So Liebe systematically varies the interval between the ordinary stimulus and the cortical stimulus, and the participants had to report which one came first. And the participants reported that the skin stimulus came first, even when the skin stimulus occurred toward the end of the train of pulses required for neuronal adequacy in the cortex, when the cortex was being stimulated. So if 500 milliseconds of neuronal activity is required for something to become conscious, why would the skin stimulus be felt before the cortical stimulus, right? So that's what Liebe has to explain. How does he explain this? He says that maybe sensory experiences are actually subjectively referred back in time once neuronal adequacy is achieved. The brain isn't literally sending information back in time, but what's happening here is information is traveling from the nervous system to the relevant area of the somatosensory cortex. If the activity continues for half a second, then the stimulus is consciously perceived. So if I have a stimulus on the skin that lasts long enough, then the stimulus is consciously perceived. And then the experience is subjectively referred back in time to the actual time at which the stimulation began, like backdating a form, right? So it's antedated by the mind. And if neuronal adequacy is not achieved, well, then we just don't experience anything. So we go ahead.
So does this mean that when we perceive the stimulus, we actively like go back in our memory and then add in that stimulus?
No, it's not active, but what the brain does is like, okay, so I'm stimulus, boom, neuronal adequacy for 500 milliseconds. So it takes 500 milliseconds for this to enter the contents of my consciousness, this sensation. But once it happens, then my brain makes it seem that I was conscious of it from the start. I mean, it's pretty far out.
That is pretty weird.
Yeah, it's pretty weird, right? But that's what Liebe is proposing. Yeah. And it's not conscious, it's not a conscious thing, and it's not really a thing to do with memory, other than maybe like immediate short-term like working memory, I suppose.
Yeah, I was just wondering like how it worked temporally. So
yeah, temporally, everything happens, you know, stimulus onset, 500 milliseconds, then it becomes conscious, but then your brain does a weird trick where it makes it seem like it was conscious for that entire time. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. Ben, go ahead.
So, like, I understand the theory, but does Liebe have any theories as to like how like the brain actually does this? Like, does he say like, oh, it's because of this function? Or
he has some ideas. Actually, I think I talk about that on the next slide. All right, so yeah, the thing is, I mean, Liebe has some explanation himself. And by and large, neuroscientists agree with the raw sort of results that Liebe has found. But where the disagreement comes is how we interpret what Liebe, like how do we interpret Liebe's results? Is Liebe's interpretation the right one? Zoe, do you still have your hand up? Or
sorry, no, I should take it down.
oh, okay, no big deal. I thought maybe I jumped over to Ben and then you still had something to say there. So yeah, it's tricky. See, the thing is, it's also tricky to replicate these experiments because you know, nowadays this kind of invasive brain surgery is performed much less often. You know, we have much better surgical tools. We can go in with robots, you know, like robotic arms and stuff, and we don't have to cut open and remove half of somebody's skull to do brain surgery anymore. So we don't get to do this much. But still, like I said a moment ago, people agree with Libe's results, but it's the interpretation. Libe's interpretation, and this I think should answer, I think this is going to answer your question, Ben, is that his interpretation is what he calls his time-on theory of consciousness. There are two things going on here. Consciousness occurs when neural activity continues long enough for neural adequacy. An activity with a shorter duration can be involved in unconscious processes or converted into a conscious experience by increasing its duration longer than half a second, right? And Libe thinks that attention works by increasing the excitability of certain areas. And that has the effect of lengthening the duration of neuronal activity. So Libe doesn't have like a specific part of the brain or anything that he thinks is responsible for this, but rather attention is really changing the level of excitability in certain neural networks in the brain, kind of like lowering the threshold for activity, right? Neurons have activation thresholds, whether we're talking about artificial neurons in a neural network or neurons in the brain. There's a certain signal, a certain amount of information or electrical potential or whatever, a certain signal strength that has to be met for that neuron to output a signal to another neuron. So I'm a neuron over here. I'm getting, maybe my threshold is 1. So I'm getting 0.75 coming in from this neuron. Well, I'm not going to output a signal to the next neuron. But if it crosses that threshold, I will. Maybe attention is raising or lowering that threshold in these of neurons in these networks. Certain things can become conscious or become unconscious, right? So if Libe's right, then this can result in neuronal adequacy, and it achieves the time on for consciousness, as he would say. So on Libe's view, it's really true that things enter consciousness or become conscious, even though Dennett would say, oh, that's too much Cartesian dualism. Libe's fine with that. Libe's fine with that. A nice feature of his theory is also that it provides an answer to the question, you know, what's the difference between conscious and unconscious processes, right? It has to do with what the length of time that activity occurs. Like excuse me. Oh, you can think of it this way. Remember when we were talking about Milner and Goodale and the dorsal and ventral systems, where we have a vision for, you know, a vision for action, which is not conscious, and vision for perception, which the contents of that are conscious. So where they're suggesting that in the ventral stream, we've got consciousness and the dorsal stream does not result in consciousness. So it's kind of like where things are happening or what system. For Libe, what's important is how long activity is occurring for, not where it is or what system it's happening in, right? What matters is time. So Libe also makes other controversial suggestions, though, like that there's a non-physical mental force, like a conscious mental field. I mean, I guess I don't know if I'm being too charitable here when I say that Libe says there's a conscious mental force or a mental field, and I'm saying that maybe that's something like an electromagnetic field. Well, electromagnetic fields are physical. So is he really saying it's a non-physical force? I don't know. Very controversial, and you know, kind of gets him labeled as a sort of a dualist. Ooh. So Roger Penrose also believes that these phenomena require new tools to explain. We need to use quantum theory. Remember, Popper and Eccles also think that there's a non-physical force that explains things like, you know, the causal power of consciousness or the subjective antedating of events in the brain. But this is all very dualistic, right? Paul and Patricia Churchland, Daniel Dennett, they're not going to support something like this because it's too much dualism. Even a little dualism is too much dualism. Ben, go ahead.
I found that kind of interesting because, like, like the Penrose thing, I wrote about that, and at least when I was reading it, I didn't really get the like inference that it was dualist, because he basically was saying like, you know, like there's probably nerve cells, and then he talked about, I forget what it was called, but like there are these like neural pathways that employ like quantum mechanics, you know, and
Yeah.
like I don't know if that's necessarily dualist, because he still like believes in materialism and like the monism of like the physical brain, at least from what I read.
Yeah, I mean, Penrose is tricky. There are some ways I think you can read him as being a dualist, and some ways that you can't. I mean, he's kind of like a Platonist, actually. I think in Emperor's New Mind, he says as much. He says, like, I actually believe numbers exist out there, almost like the Platonic forms, right? And that's a kind of dualism, because you have, you know, it's phenomena and noumena, right? So yeah, maybe you're right. It would be a bit uncharitable to call him a dualist on the basis of what he says about quantum mechanics, but I mean, he still does have some very like Platonic, like almost like a Platonic realism, but with numbers.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I think he believes like numbers are just natural, you know. But I
Yeah,
don't know if that means anything about the mind. Like I don't know if he believes in like, you know, the whole like ghost in the machine type of deal.
yeah. I suspect he would tell you that he doesn't. I think you're probably right. I think that even though I disagree with what he says about quantum mechanics, those are still physical processes, right? And yeah. What time is it? I think we're nearly there. Yeah, 12:49. Well, maybe we should actually end it here, because this is getting into a whole new kind of tangent. So I think what we'll do is wrap up this chapter next time. Yeah, because we just have a little bit of stuff to do. Not much. Then we'll go on to the next one, which is really interesting. It's about freedom of the will. Grand illusion. Donovan, go ahead.
One thing I want to say about like this idea that there is the delay in the sort of like conscious information processing, and that your brain automatically like goes like out of its way to fill in like the information lost in that delay. I don't find that like too difficult to believe, like, because it's kind of like for example, when I take notes for lectures like this, I like to take notes like word for word what the slides say. And what that means is sometimes I'll like miss stuff, like either like I stop paying attention briefly and I miss a slide, or I'm like late to the lecture, or I miss a lecture, right? And if I want my notes to be, you know, like complete, I have to go back at some point and fill in the information that I missed. And it's a sort of thing of that takes extra time and energy. But I imagine, like with the brain's job of processing everything going on around you, that extra time and energy spent is worth it for the end result. Like, I don't think it's just logically it doesn't. I logically it's not like it's like completely like weird, and like I have a hard time like, you know, buying it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, like, and mentioning filling in, like, this is something that I think we'll talk about more, but there is a bit of a debate on whether the brain fills in missing details, whether it's antedating subjective experiences or adding color to peripheral vision, right? I mean, look, so yes, there are some people who are colorblind, but for those that are not colorblind, in the periphery of your visual field, it's not, you don't see in black and white. Yet the I think it's, what is it? It's rods or cones. I always forget which ones are for color. I think cones are for color, but I could be wrong. They're all concentrated.
Cones are color.
Yeah, they're all concentrated such that it's all rods around the periphery of the retina. So what's going on? Is the brain adding the color? Like, I don't know. So it's pretty far out though. kind of hurts if you think about it too much, but at welcome perplexity, right? That's what Blackmore was saying. Ben, go ahead.
So this is kind of unrelated, but I thought it was just like a little bit interesting. Have you ever heard of electric epidural stimulation?
I don't know. It sounds like just stimulating the skin with electricity, right?
Well, it's like basically recently it's to treat like paralysis. And so recently they were able to make like 3 paralyzed guys like walk again using this
Oh,
electrical stimulation.
I think I saw that in my news feed. Yeah, I didn't read the article, but yeah, okay, yeah, continue.
Yeah, like I don't really understand it because like I'm not a scientist, but like I just thought it was interesting because if they're able to stimulate, nerves using an external like machine basically, and interface it with the brain, because basically like what I was reading is they're able, like it connects to the brain through the nervous system, and then it works as like normal nerves would,
Yeah,
which is like crazy because
yeah.
that sort of like that is like a technology that could be used in a lot of other areas too.
Oh, absolutely. And it's crazy the advances that we're making in this area. When I was a kid, this was literally science fiction. Literally science fiction. There is, and I remember, I mean, I know Zoe's a Star Trek fan, so she's going to know what I'm talking about. Maybe a few others will, but there's an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation where Worf is paralyzed, right? Yeah, thumbs up. Zoe knows what I'm talking about. And there's this whole thing. He's a Klingon warrior, so he wants to die with honor, so he's got to kill himself or something. But they developed this radical procedure where they're actually able to transplant his spine, right? Before that, they're trying a similar thing to what Ben was describing, and it's not working well enough for Worf. He's all like, don't look at me, I am dishonored, or Klingon stuff, right? So eventually they find something that works. But yeah, that idea was there. And this was just science fiction when I was younger. Here I am, I'm 35, and I'm like, wow, we're actually doing this. This is nuts. So cool. And so many applications. Medicine, cybernetics. Really neat stuff. Really neat stuff. So, well, it's 12:55, so I suppose we should leave it there. We've left off with a sci-fi Star Trek rant, so that's always good. I hope everyone has a good weekend, and I am keeping just so that you're all aware, I am keeping a close eye on the situation in Ottawa. Doug Ford, I think, finally came out of his mom's backyard and made an announcement about a state of emergency. I'm gonna go check that out. But yeah, Drew, go ahead.
Are we going to get back our first consciousness responses, like our first reading responses, before the second one is due, so that we get feedback?
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to try and have them done over the weekend, and then that way you'll have like a few days next week to kind of digest the feedback, right? And speaking of next week, as I was saying, I think I'm going to keep it online for now, just because, I mean, there are fewer people here in town right now. I was down at Rideau Street the other day, and it's, there's still a lot of people. The crowd has shrunk, but it could grow again over the weekend. I don't know if they're going to start clearing people out. Things could get a bit weird. I don't know. And also, I'm not going to ask you if you want to wear a mask or I'm not going to ask you to walk through this crowd of people that have been, kind of assholes to people wearing masks and people who are, a visible minority or visibly queer people. I'm not going to ask you to subject yourselves to that nonsense, right? I want you all to stay safe. So we're going to keep it online for now, but I will keep a close eye on the situation, and we'll go from there. Okay. So stay safe, everyone. Have a good weekend, and I'll get that feedback to you all shortly. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now, everyone.
Thanks for having a good weekend.
Thanks. You too. Be safe. I'll see you guys next week. End transmission.